You don't know who I am, human, she sneered, her eyes narrowing with disdain. But you'll soon regret this decision. Ethan stood still, feeling the weight of the alien's gaze on him as she was led into the dimly lit cargo hold. Her body was bound, her movements restricted, but her presence was undeniable. Despite the harsh treatment, there was an air of quiet defiance around her, an aura of strength that Ethan couldn't ignore. He had seen countless creatures in his time as a shipper and trader, but none quite like this one. The alien woman, with her pale violet skin and platinum hair, looked like she belonged to another world entirely, far removed from the dirt and grime of the star system they were currently in. But here she was, shackled and sold as a slave, a fate she clearly found beneath her. Ethan had been warned not to get involved in the underworld dealings he often found himself in, but he couldn't help it. There was something about her that stirred something deep inside him, something that wasn't just pity but curiosity. What kind of being could be reduced to this? What had brought her here? But even as he asked himself these questions, he knew the answer. She was a slave, a mere commodity, and he, a simple human, had accepted her as part of a trade. His mission was clear: get the goods, complete the transaction, and leave this all behind. But in his heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a mistake. As the ship set off into the void, Ethan couldn't help but wonder about the woman's story. Why had she been sold? Who had betrayed her? And more importantly, how could someone like her end up in the hands of men like these? She didn't fit the mold of a typical slave. There was no sign of fear in her eyes, only an intense, focused anger that hinted at a deeper strength. As the hours passed, Ethan couldn't help but glance at her occasionally. Her composure, even in such dire circumstances, was unsettling. It was as though she knew something he didn't. It wasn't until the ship entered the docking bay of the space station that the truth began to dawn on him. A harsh voice called out from the entrance of the cargo hold. "Are you done with your little pet, human?" Ethan stood up, ready to face the crew that had been dealing in slaves. But as the hatch opened, something unexpected happened. The alien woman, his supposed slave, stood with perfect posture, her shackles falling away as if they were nothing but an inconvenience. She turned to him, her expression changing from one of quiet defiance to something more complex, something that made Ethan's heart race. "I am not what you think I am," she said softly, her voice calm yet powerful. "I never was." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, he realized how wrong he had been. This wasn't just a slave. She wasn't some forgotten prisoner of war or some unlucky victim of fate. She was something far more dangerous. And that was just the beginning. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Ethan stood frozen, trying to process what she had just said. The woman, who moments ago he thought was a slave, was now standing tall, her posture regal and commanding. Her shackles, once a symbol of her bondage, had fallen to the floor with a soft clink, as though they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation. "What do you mean? You're not what I think you are," he asked, his voice unsteady, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. She met his gaze, her violet eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "I am Princess Lyra of the Drellian dynasty," she said, her voice calm, yet laced with authority. "I was kidnapped, imprisoned, and sold as a slave by those who seek to exploit my people." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The realization hit him like a wave. He had just unknowingly accepted the payment for a royal hostage, and now he was standing before someone who held unimaginable power. "A princess," Ethan repeated, his voice almost a whisper. She nodded. "Yes, I have been betrayed, sold into this pitiful existence, but I will not be a pawn in their game." Ethan took a step back, his mind reeling. He had been so focused on completing the transaction and getting away from the underworld dealings that he had failed to see the bigger picture. He had brought a royal hostage onto his ship, and now he was responsible for her safety. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "What now?" he asked, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "Now," she said, her voice hardening, "you will help me. Help me escape from this place. Help me reclaim what is mine." Ethan hesitated. He had no idea what he was getting into. But there was something about her, something in the way she held herself, the quiet strength radiating from her, that made him want to help. He didn't know the full extent of what she was capable of, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn his back on her now. "I'm in," he said, his voice steady for the first time since the moment she had revealed her true identity. "I'll help you." Princess Lyra's eyes softened, just slightly, though the intensity remained. "You are braver than most, human. But be warned, the path ahead will not be easy. There are forces that will stop at nothing to keep me from returning to my throne." Ethan nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. He had no illusions about the dangers ahead, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to leave her behind. "We'll figure it out," he said. Together. As the ship glided silently through the stars, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. What had started as a routine trade had now become a mission to protect a princess and stop a conspiracy that spanned across galaxies. And somehow, despite the odds, he was ready to face whatever came next. As the days passed, Ethan found himself caught in a whirlwind of plans, uncertainty, and unexpected camaraderie with Princess Lyra. The initial shock of discovering her true identity had begun to wear off, but the gravity of their situation only seemed to deepen with each passing hour. They were no longer simply fleeing from a simple transaction gone wrong. They were now on the run, with enemies lurking in every shadow. The stakes were higher than Ethan had ever imagined. Princess Lyra had been clear. Her enemies were not just a few rogue traders or bounty hunters. They were a vast, well-organized network determined to keep her imprisoned or worse, to erase her from the galaxy's history altogether. Ethan spent most of his days learning everything he could about Lyra's world, her people, and the forces that sought to control her. As he absorbed the intricacies of the political power struggles in the Drellian dynasty, he began to understand just how dangerous their journey would be. Yet, with each piece of information, he also found himself becoming more determined to help her. He could see now that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice, for the future of an entire civilization. One evening, after a long day of planning their next move, Lyra approached Ethan as he stood by the ship's viewport, staring out into the cold void of space. Her presence was calming yet powerful, as always. "Ethan," she said softly, her violet eyes studying him. "I know this path is dangerous, but I need you to understand something." Ethan turned to face her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" he asked. Lyra took a step closer, her voice steady but filled with an emotion he hadn't seen before. "You're not just helping me because it's the right thing to do. I've seen how you've changed. You've become a part of this, part of my fight. I don't know how or why, but I believe that we were meant to meet." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her words to have such an impact on him. For the first time, he truly realized the weight of what they were doing. This wasn't just a mission, it was a calling. It was more than just his duty as a trader or a protector. He was becoming part of something greater, something that had the potential to change the fate of an entire galaxy. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "But I'm not turning back now. I'll see this through, Lyra. Whatever it takes." Lyra smiled, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "You're stronger than you know, Ethan. We all are." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling in. Then, as if a silent agreement had passed between them, they turned their attention back to their mission. There was no time to waste. The galaxy awaited, and they had a kingdom to reclaim. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Lyra began to put their plans into motion. They had to be smart, careful, every move they made had to be calculated. They couldn't afford to be reckless. Every decision had the potential to change the course of their lives. But as time went on, Ethan found that he was no longer afraid of the unknown. With Lyra by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. Their enemies would soon learn that there was far more to Ethan Reed than just a simple trader. He was part of something far larger than he had ever imagined. And with Lyra at the helm, they would face every challenge head-on. Ithaca Station was bustling with activity as Ethan and Lyra made their final preparations. The station, a massive hub in the galaxy, was a place of constant traffic. Traders, diplomats, bounty hunters, and mercenaries all passed through its gleaming corridors. It was the perfect place to blend in, but it also posed significant risks. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Ethan stood at the edge of the docking bay, the hum of the station's engines filling the background as Lyra joined him. Her violet eyes scanned the room, ever watchful, her presence undeniable. She had changed since their first meeting, no longer the captive but a woman reclaiming her destiny. He couldn't help but admire her strength. "This is it," Ethan said, adjusting his jacket and looking over the schematics of the station's layout. "Once we dock, we'll need to move fast. The information we need is in the hands of someone who doesn't like to be found." Lyra nodded, her focus unwavering. "I know, but we'll find him. He won't be expecting us." Ethan's confidence wavered slightly. There was something unsettling about the whole situation. The stakes had risen, and they were walking a fine line between success and disaster. The target, a high-ranking member of a shadow syndicate, was the key to unlocking the conspiracy that had led to Lyra's capture. And now, he held the information that could not only clear her name, but also bring down the empire that had betrayed her. But getting to him would not be easy. The syndicate's reach extended far beyond what they could imagine, and if they were discovered, it would be their end. As the ship approached the docking port, Ethan felt his pulse quicken. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of their mission pressed down on him. Lyra seemed to sense his anxiety. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but steady, "you've already done more than anyone could have asked. Whatever happens, we've come this far together. Don't forget that." Her words had a calming effect on him, but they didn't erase the tension. They were heading into enemy territory, and there was no turning back. The ship's landing gear touched down with a soft thud, the metallic sound echoing through the quiet of the hold. Ethan grabbed his bag, checked his weapon, and nodded to Lyra. "Let's go." As they stepped off the ship, the cold air of Ithaca Station hit them. The bustling crowd of aliens and humans filled the space around them, but they kept their heads down, moving quickly toward their destination. The syndicate's contacts were known for being difficult to trust, and the slightest mistake could blow their cover. They had to move carefully, blending in with the crowd, avoiding any unnecessary attention. Their destination was a small, unassuming building on the edge of the station, a place where deals were made in the shadows. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him as they entered the building. The inside was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of spiced liquor and smoke. At a table in the corner, their contact waited, a tall alien with dark red skin and sharp eyes. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "You're late," he said, his voice low but tinged with suspicion. Ethan didn't flinch. "We had some complications, but we're here now." The alien nodded slowly, eyeing Lyra for a moment before speaking again. "I hope you're prepared for what comes next. This isn't a game, human. You're playing with lives." Ethan met his gaze, his resolve hardening. "I'm ready. We all are." The deal was set. They had their information. Now, all that remained was to make it out alive. The air in the building grew heavier as Ethan and Lyra exchanged glances with their contact, the tall alien with dark red skin. The tension in the room was palpable. The deal had been set. The information they sought was now in their hands. But they both knew that this wasn't over yet. They couldn't afford to let their guard down, not when they were so close. The alien spoke again, his voice low and cautious. "You know what you're asking for. This information won't come without consequences." Ethan stood firm, his hands steady as he nodded. "We understand." He glanced at Lyra, whose expression was unreadable. Her eyes were focused, sharp, calculating. She wasn't one to back down, not after everything she'd been through. The alien leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to Lyra once more. "Be careful," he said, his tone grave. "You're not the only ones who want this. There are others. Dangerous people." Ethan didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing. He had known that the information they had obtained would lead to more danger, but hearing it from their contact made it all the more real. "We can handle it," Ethan finally said. "But if we're going to get this right, we need your help. We need to get out of here." The alien studied him for a moment before nodding slightly. "The exit is clear. Go, and do not trust anyone." With that, the two of them turned and walked toward the door, the weight of the conversation still heavy on their shoulders. As they exited the building, the bustling sounds of Ithaca Station filled the air once more. People moved quickly through the corridors, oblivious to the danger that lingered just out of sight. Ethan's mind was still reeling from the gravity of their mission. The information they now possessed had the potential to turn the tide in Lyra's favor, but it also made them a target. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan, we need to move faster. The syndicate will be looking for us. Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening. He knew she was right. They couldn't afford to wait around. The enemy would come for them soon, and they needed to stay one step ahead. They made their way to the nearest transport hub, their pace quickening with every step. Lyra's hand rested lightly on his arm as they moved through the crowds. Despite the urgency of the situation, there was a sense of calm about her, a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her. It was as if she had already accepted the risk of what lay ahead. As they approached the transport station, Ethan glanced at Lyra. "You're sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "I've been ready for this my whole life, Ethan. There's no turning back now." With that, they boarded the transport and made their way to their next destination. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were in this together, and nothing was going to stop them. The transport hummed to life as it sped through the station, the lights of Ithaca Station fading into the distance behind them. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the shadows around them were closing in. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. They had a mission now, one that would take them to the very heart of the conspiracy that had torn Lyra's world apart. And no matter the cost, they were going to finish it. The transport zipped through the busy station corridors, weaving past ships and docking platforms as they made their way to the outskirts of Ithaca Station. Ethan glanced out of the viewport, his thoughts racing. Lyra sat beside him, her eyes distant, focused on the mission ahead. The bustling city of Ithaca was a blur outside the windows, but in here, with Lyra at his side, the world seemed to slow down. They had just acquired the information they needed, but Ethan knew that getting out of the station alive was going to be the true challenge. He turned to Lyra, his voice quiet but determined. "We need to be ready for anything. The syndicate won't give up this easily." Lyra nodded, her violet eyes meeting his. "I know," she said softly, "but we're not running anymore. We're going after them, Ethan. We're going to take back what's ours." Her confidence was contagious, but Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the odds were stacked against them. But as the transport sped through the docking lanes, he realized that they were no longer just surviving. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. As the transport neared its destination, the distant hum of the station grew quieter, replaced by the sounds of the ship's engines as it prepared to dock. Ethan could feel his heart rate picking up. This was it, the moment they would either succeed or fail. They would either reclaim Lyra's throne or be forced into hiding for the rest of their lives. Lyra's hand moved to his, a quiet gesture of solidarity. "Whatever happens, we face it together," she said, her voice steady. Ethan squeezed her hand, nodding. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. As the transport touched down on the landing pad, the hatch opened, and they stepped into the dimly lit area. The air was cooler here, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the station. They didn't have much time. They needed to get to the rendezvous point, where a contact of Lyra's would provide them with the final piece of the puzzle, the location of the syndicate's headquarters. "Stay close," Ethan murmured as they began walking through the narrow passageways. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet, a stark reminder that they were entering enemy territory. Lyra's eyes flicked around, constantly on alert, while Ethan kept his focus straight ahead. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. As they approached a corner, Ethan motioned for Lyra to stop. He listened carefully. The sound of distant voices reached his ears, followed by the unmistakable hiss of a door opening. He motioned for Lyra to duck into a nearby alcove, his heart pounding. They waited in silence, the voices growing louder. From around the corner came a group of station security guards, talking among themselves. Ethan held his breath, praying they wouldn't spot them. Fortunately, the guards passed without noticing, and the two of them exhaled in unison, relieved. "That was too close," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide. Ethan nodded, pulling her closer. "We can't afford to take risks like that again. Let's keep moving." They continued on, more cautiously this time, making their way through the maze-like corridors. Time was running out, and they had to act quickly. As they reached the rendezvous point, a figure emerged from the shadows. The contact was a tall, wiry man with sharp features and a hood that obscured most of his face. His eyes glinted with a mixture of suspicion and calculation as he approached. "You're late," he said, his voice low but commanding. Ethan stepped forward, keeping his tone steady. "We had to be careful. The syndicate knows we're coming." The man nodded, his eyes flicking to Lyra for a moment before returning to Ethan. "I have what you need," he said, pulling out a small data pad. "This will take you to the syndicate's headquarters. But be warned, once you go in, there's no turning back." Ethan took the pad, glancing at Lyra. She gave him a nod, her resolve as strong as ever. They had come this far, and there was no stopping them now. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned and vanished into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Ethan and Lyra stood there for a moment, the weight of the next move settling over them. They had what they needed. Now, all that was left was to face the syndicate head-on. And Ethan knew, without a doubt, that whatever happened next, they would fight for what was rightfully hers, and for their future. The weight of the data pad in Ethan's hand was more than just the physical burden. It felt like the key to everything, the culmination of their journey, the one piece that would either lead to freedom or ruin. They had come this far, and now, with the coordinates to the syndicate's headquarters in hand, it was time to move. The corridors of Ithaca Station had begun to feel less like a bustling hub and more like a labyrinth, each turn and shadow a reminder of the danger that waited. They had to act quickly, but carefully. Ethan glanced at Lyra, her eyes sharp with focus, her expression unreadable. She had come a long way from the frightened woman he had first met. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with. He could see the resolve in her, and it gave him the strength to push forward. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the nerves that churned in his stomach. Lyra met his gaze, a small, determined smile tugging at her lips. "I've been ready for this my whole life, Ethan," she replied. "Let's finish it." They walked briskly, their footsteps echoing in the quiet, dimly lit halls of the station. Every step felt like it could be their last, but they couldn't afford to waste time. The sooner they found the syndicate's headquarters, the sooner they could take the fight to them. The path to their destination wasn't easy. They had to navigate through hidden passages, avoid security patrols, and stay out of sight. But with each step, Ethan felt a growing sense of purpose. For the first time since this journey began, he wasn't just following orders or trying to survive. He was fighting for something. He was fighting for Lyra, for her future, and for the truth. As they neared their destination, Ethan's heart began to race. The data pad had provided them with an entrance, a hidden door on the lower levels of the station that would lead them directly into the syndicate's territory. But he knew better than to think this would be easy. They weren't the only ones with plans. The syndicate had eyes everywhere, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. They arrived at the door, its sleek metal surface reflecting the dim light from the station's overhead lamps. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who nodded in silent understanding. He inserted the data pad into a small panel beside the door, watching as the screen flickered to life. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a darkened passage beyond. This was it. They stepped inside, the door closing silently behind them. The passage was narrow, the air thick with the scent of machinery and old metal. As they moved deeper into the heart of the syndicate's stronghold, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing compared to this. The stakes had never been higher. They moved quietly, their every step measured, as they followed the winding path that would lead them to the heart of the syndicate's operations. The sound of distant voices reached their ears, and Ethan motioned for Lyra to stop. They pressed themselves against the cold walls of the passage, listening intently. A group of syndicate operatives passed by, their voices muffled but still audible. Ethan held his breath, watching as they disappeared down the hallway. He exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. "We need to stay quiet," he whispered to Lyra. "We can't risk being discovered." Lyra nodded, her expression focused as she glanced down the passage. "Agreed. We're close now. We can't afford any mistakes." They continued, moving with purpose, until they reached a set of heavy, reinforced doors. This was it, the final obstacle. The door was sealed tight, but the data pad provided the final piece of the puzzle. With a few swift movements, Ethan accessed the controls and input the necessary codes. The door clicked open, and they stepped into the heart of the syndicate's operation. The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with large, sleek terminals and monitors. In the center, a massive holographic display illuminated the space, showing complex data and maps. But Ethan wasn't focused on the technology. His eyes were on the figures standing in the center of the room, high-ranking members of the syndicate, discussing their next moves. This was it. They had made it to the inner sanctum. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who was already moving forward, her eyes locked on the syndicate leaders. She didn't hesitate. This was her fight, and she was ready to take it back. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation as Ethan and Lyra stepped further into the heart of the syndicate's headquarters. The leaders, a group of well-dressed and imposing figures, stood in front of the large holographic display, oblivious to the intruders just beyond their reach. Ethan could feel his pulse quicken, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Lyra's grip tightened on her blaster, and Ethan instinctively reached for his own weapon, though he knew the situation would require more than just firepower. This was about strategy, precision, and finding a way to get the upper hand without being caught. As they advanced, their footsteps muffled by the thick, metallic flooring, Ethan's mind raced. He glanced at Lyra, her eyes locked on the syndicate leaders. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no fear. She was focused, determined. This wasn't just a battle for power, it was a battle for justice, for the future of her people. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "We can't just burst in," Ethan whispered, his voice low. "We need to outsmart them, not outgun them." Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. She raised a hand, signaling for him to stay back. She moved swiftly, blending into the shadows of the room as she silently positioned herself closer to the syndicate leaders. Ethan watched her, his heart racing. He knew this was her moment, her chance to confront the ones who had stolen everything from her. The syndicate leaders continued to discuss their plans, unaware of the impending danger. Lyra's fingers hovered over the control panel next to her, her movements precise, calculated. She was ready. Ethan stayed in position, keeping a watchful eye on the leaders, prepared to act the moment Lyra made her move. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, but Lyra remained calm, her focus unwavering. She activated the controls, causing the holographic display to flicker and glitch. The leaders turned, startled by the sudden interruption. "What's going on?" one of them demanded, his voice sharp. Lyra didn't wait for a response. She stepped forward, her presence commanding attention as she addressed the syndicate leaders. "You've been hiding behind your power for far too long," she said, her voice strong, steady. "It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." The leaders stared at her in disbelief, their faces contorting with shock as the realization hit them. The woman they had once viewed as a powerless pawn was now standing before them, defiant and unbroken. One of the leaders stepped forward, his expression hardened. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered. "You're nothing more than a lost princess with no kingdom. You've already lost." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her determination never faltering. "You've mistaken me for someone who is afraid of losing," she replied, her voice cold as ice. "This is not about reclaiming a throne. This is about making things right." Ethan could feel the intensity in the room building as the leaders realized that they were facing not just an opponent, but a force that had been underestimated for far too long. They had underestimated Lyra's resolve, her intelligence, and her strength. Now, it was their turn to be afraid. "You've had your chance," Lyra continued, her gaze unwavering. "Now it's mine, and I will make sure you never hurt anyone again." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Ethan knew the battle ahead would not be easy, but with Lyra at the helm, he had no doubt that they were ready. Together, they would take down the syndicate, not with brute force, but with their determination, their intelligence, and their unshakable resolve. And this time, they would win. The silence in the room stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of the machines and the faint breathing of the syndicate leaders. Lyra stood tall, unwavering, her voice echoing through the space. Ethan stood just behind her, his hand resting lightly on his weapon, ready to spring into action at the first sign of trouble. But for now, there was nothing but the quiet tension of the moment. The leaders exchanged nervous glances, their arrogance from earlier replaced with uncertainty. They had underestimated Lyra. They had thought her weak, a pawn in their game. But now, she was the one with control. "You're running out of time," Lyra said, her tone calm but filled with authority. "You know what I'm capable of. You know what will happen if you don't comply." One of the leaders, a man with graying hair and a sharp, calculating look, took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Lyra. "You may have the upper hand for now," he said, his voice steady but tinged with fear. "But you're still just a princess. You're not prepared for what's coming." Lyra's gaze never wavered. "I've been prepared my whole life," she replied, her voice steady and unyielding. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. And this time, you won't get away with it." Ethan could see the cracks forming in their confidence, the realization that they had underestimated her finally sinking in. The leaders may have been powerful, but they were beginning to realize that Lyra was no longer someone they could control. "You don't have to do this," the leader with graying hair said, his voice softening as he tried to regain some semblance of control. "We can make a deal. There's still time to work this out." Lyra shook her head slowly, the corners of her mouth curling into a slight smile. "No deal," she said firmly. "You've already made your choices. And now, you will face the consequences." Ethan's heart raced as the tension in the room reached its peak. He could feel the air growing heavier, as though everything was building toward a tipping point. The syndicate had controlled everything for so long, but now they were powerless, standing at the edge of their downfall. Lyra's voice cut through the silence once more. "This is your last chance. Surrender. Turn yourselves in. And maybe, just maybe, you'll have a chance at redemption." There was a long pause as the leaders exchanged looks. They could see the conviction in Lyra's eyes, the absolute certainty that there was no room for negotiation. They had no choice but to comply, or face the wrath of someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Slowly, the leader with the graying hair stepped back, his face a mask of defeat. "We surrender," he said quietly. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good," she replied simply. "Now we end this." Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his body finally releasing as he realized that they had done it. The syndicate had been brought to its knees, and Lyra had reclaimed her power. There was still much to be done, but this was a victory, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. They had won. But as Lyra turned to face him, her gaze softening, he knew that this was only the beginning. There were still battles to be fought, and the road ahead would be long. But together, they could face whatever came next. "Thank you, Ethan," Lyra said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad I could be part of this. I'm glad I could help you." Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with something deeper, something that went beyond gratitude. It was respect. And in that moment, Ethan knew that they were not just allies. They were something more. They were a team, and they would face whatever came next, together.